Okay, there we go. How is that?
Yes.
Okay, thanks, Alicia. I see you nodding. Okay, so welcome to our webinar for today. Like I said, it's going to be a little bit different format because we want a lot of feedback. I'm going to still just kind of give a reminder and okay, great. Overview of why we're here, and I think all of you have seen this and know this, but just to get us on the same page, we're funded through a research coordination network grant from NSF, the Undergraduate Field Experiences Research Network, and we hope to build a collaborative network that fosters effective undergraduate field experiences. And these are some of our goals, and this framework we're presenting today really follows directly from several of these goals and a lot of work that we did at our first network meeting and many, many other conversations since then. And the idea is that we have an open, inclusive network with a way for everyone to be involved. So again, super excited that you're here. It can help us think about this complex topic. The other thing I want to mention before we really get started is our next webinar in our series for May, and I'm kind of doubting we'll have one in June. So this will probably be our last one, at least for a little while. We're going to have Dr. Eric Dotilli give us a webinar about his recent PhD research, which is around implicit bias in recruitment and selection to undergraduate research programs. So just keep your eye out for that announcement and link. That'll be on May 8th. And I don't know if Sandra Larson is on the call. She was maybe going to be in the call, and she's actually who hooked me up with Eric. So thanks to Sandra for that. And now on to our webinar for today. And there are three of us kind of doing this webinar together, and myself, my colleague Kelly Hoke, and just really want to acknowledge Kelly, who's contributed so much to this effort. For those of you who were at our network meeting last year at Kellogg Biological Station, we had Robbie Nielsen, and she went on to a PhD program at Cornell, and we've had Kelly helping manage the project since then, and she really contributed to this effort. But unfortunately in Corvallis, there's a lot of flooding of the Willamette River, and our schools got delayed. So Kelly couldn't be with us this morning, but I just really want to acknowledge her. And then my colleague, Michael G. Millaro, and myself. And instead of reading a bio, I'm gonna let Mike introduce himself really quick. Mike?
Sure, yeah, so I'm Mike G. Millaro, and I'm an assistant professor in the College of Education at OSU, Oregon State. And my primary area of research examines the role of context in learning content knowledge. So that's at the learning process level and the curriculum level and even the system level. And certainly that includes field experiences in learning. So that's the quick version.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Yeah, and you all know me, but I mean, I want to say I'm super excited about this effort because it lets me think about all my hats I've worn. I was both a director at a field station and ran some undergraduate research programs myself. And then in the past few years, I've been working at Oregon State University and studying STEM learning, in particular, field-based learning experiences. And then we also have Victoria Bonebreak. You might see her name. She's a colleague of mine as well who jumped on to help with logistics and helping me track questions and everything. So thanks, Victoria, for jumping on at literally the last second. So I just want to go over a couple logistic things since this is a kind of a different kind of webinar. If y'all could, I think you all could keep yourselves muted just for feedback or anything. But I do encourage you to, if you have questions, to either use the chat or speak out. We're a small enough group. The other thing is we are a recording webinar. This webinar, at least mostly for us, because we want to have comment, a record of all the comments and discussion that happened. And then hopefully you got my email maybe an hour and a half ago or so with the versions of the framework, just so you could look at that or print that out while we're going through them. I certainly didn't expect you to have looked at it beforehand. But I guess let me know maybe in the chat if you didn't get it. And Victoria said she'd be glad to re-forward it on to you. And if you have the bandwidth to write in notes or comments in your version of the framework, either typed or written, and send that to us afterwards in whatever form, that would be awesome. So thanks for that. And then I want to start just really briefly for a quick round of introductions of the group. Just if everyone can give their name, institution, and their main area of expertise, that would be awesome. And I think I'm just going to call on you because then otherwise it gets confusing about who goes first. So Julie, why don't you go first? You're first on my screen. And I'll know if you're sleeping too.
I did.
Or just taking a while to get to your mouse.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm also home because of school delays. I'm the Associate Director at the Center for Research and Lifelong STEM Learning and work with Kari on various projects. But really in this project, I'm just sort of having my lens on the group as a network because I study networks in my own research.
Thanks, Julie. Teresa, do you want to go next?
Okay, I'm Teresa Murad. I'm the Director of Education and Diversity Programs at the Ecological Society of America. I don't know what my expertise is. I guess I just have experiences working with undergraduate students, particularly with the SEEDS program, which is a diversity mentoring program for undergrads, and been thinking about broadening participation questions for a long time, and faculty development. Kinds of support for it as part of my job. So.
Thanks, Teresa. Alicia, do you want to go next? Yep. We can have one. Oh, okay.
Sorry, it took me a while to find me and unmute me. My name's Alicia Farmer. I'm with the University of Michigan Biological Station. And I'm the program manager there for a relatively new transforming learning program. And my expertise, such as it is mainly with administration. So the university bureaucracy and program creation. This is the second big program at U of M that I've been involved with kind of helping launch.
Thanks, Alicia. Nia, do you want to go next?
Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay. Hi, my name is Nia Morales. I am a social science researcher for the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, but I did my dissertation research on motivations and barriers for minority students getting careers in natural resources, and part of that involved looking at undergraduate internship programs. So I think that's how I wound up here.
Yeah. Thanks, Nia. Dave?
Hi, I'm Dave Moak. I'm at Montana State University, and I'm a geologist. And part of my research portfolio is research on learning in the field setting. So I'm looking forward to seeing what the framework is.
Yeah. Thanks, Dave. Alan?
I'm Alan Berkowitz. I'm the head of education at the Carey Institute in upstate New York and associated with a number of different undergraduate research programs and field education programs.
Thanks, Alan. Stacy?
Hi, can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, hi, I'm Stacy McNulty. I'm with the State University of New York College of Environmental Science and Forestry in the Adirondack Mountains, which is super upstate of Allen. So I am partly directing a field station here called the Adirondack Ecological Center, which is a big research station. And my other hat that I'd be wearing today is through the Organization of Biological Field Stations, which I'm currently the president. So it's nice to meet everybody.
Thanks, Stacy. Stephanie? I don't think we've heard from you yet.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Shulsky. I'm the Program Evaluation Coordinator for the Transforming Learning Program at the University of Michigan Biological Station. And my area of expertise is in educational psychology, specifically motivation and belonging for college students.
Excellent. I think I've gotten, oh, Danielle, we haven't heard from you yet.
Hello, I'm Danielle Zollner. So I'm trained as a plant community ecologist, but I have a real interest in student learning in the field. And I'm at the Kellogg Biological Station, and I run or help coordinate and run an NSF-REU program, an MSU-based undergraduate research program, as well as an internship program. And then we also have a host of field-based courses that we run for undergraduates out there. So.
Okay, great. Thanks, Danielle.
Mm-hmm.
I think I got everybody. If I missed any of you, just speak out. That would be easiest right now. So into the meat of what we're talking about today. I just wanted to give hopefully a really kind of brief idea of the origins of this framework, and many of you who are on the Zoom call have been involved even, from the very beginning and thinking about it. I mean, the first really discussions that led to this framework were when we were writing this Research Coordination Network proposal, and there was this real discussion, and even before then that I wasn't as involved in, but this idea that many of us who have worked at field stations and do lead field learning experiences, that there's this transformative field experience. What is this transformative nature of the field experience, and how can we talk about that, and how can we discuss that impact? How can we really better understand it through research? So that's where some of these ideas came from. But as we were working in our first network meeting and many other conversations, this other conversation was happening about kind of who's in and who's out in this conversation. Are we only talking about the 10-week intensive field experience, which we were really talking about as that transformative one, where you go to a field station and spend 10 weeks kind of, with this really residential aspect, or what kind of impacts and what's the value for whom of other kinds of field experiences, either traveling geology ones, as Gillian Bowser, one of the co-PIs in this project, says, what about for those of us who are leading geology experiences out of a bus, on the van on the side of the road? Where does that idea fit into all this, and what kind of content areas? And that was a big conversation at our first network meeting. And then we think about people like Nia as well, who have worked with natural resources internships. So what we wanted to do, not just about the people, but just to be thinking about how we wanted to set all this up, to think about this whole idea in a really more inclusive way, and not just work to define the transformative field experience and assume that that's kind of the only one we want to be thinking about, but to set up a framework that would help us think about the broader nature of undergraduate field experiences, and to be able to look at what kind of experience are students having, for what goals and for whom. So that's kind of some of the origins, and I'm just going to catch on my notes here to see if there's anything else I wanted to say about that. The other things on the slide that I want to remember to say is that what we're showing, this framework, it is still draft form. It's come from many other efforts, and I just mentioned a couple of key papers we've been looking at. This Auchincloss paper, and I'm glad to share the references, is from another RCN meeting, the CURE group, course-based undergraduate research experiences, and the research that Dave Moak talked about is a paper I've read many, many times, and some work by Mike Giamolaro. So I just mentioned those as key efforts that gave us ideas and things we're looking at. And then I have the 4DEE, the four-dimensional ecology education framework, listed because we're hoping that our work with this framework, this is really about field-based learning experiences, will be able to feed and support that effort, which has a field component to it as well. So just mentioning those. And then the other thing I'm going to remember to say right now is that Mike Giamolaro will be jumping in at some point, and I'm just going to go ahead and give a blanket reminder that if I'm missing important things, Mike, jump in and point them out for me, please. And then the other thing that I wanted to do was really acknowledge really a lot of, and I may have missed some names, but at our first network meeting, there's a picture of that at the Kellogg Biological Station. We had this Connecting Evidence to Program Design working group, and Ian Billick was the lead of that, and he just couldn't make it today, or he would have been here. But I want to acknowledge the other people who really gave this framework a start, and we're basing a lot of what we're doing with it on that initial work. So Thank you. And what that group did was really identify different characteristics that they thought, and this was a group similar to one we have right now, were important to field-based learning experiences. And what we wanted to do was then look at not only just what characteristics of programs might be important for field learning experiences, but what overall characteristics might be important for learning, and put our social science, STEM education research hat on top of what people who are I would say the wisdom of the practitioners in the field put together for that working group. So now I'm going to hand it over to Mike, who's just going to mention the goal of the framework, and then I'll start showing you what we've been doing.
Okay. The long-term goal of the framework is to provide some design guidelines, right, for people who are creating or implementing field learning experiences. That's not where we are yet. So the framework as it is really trying to frame a theory of learning, and certainly there's no lack of theories of learning. But the reality of any framework that looks at learning is that there are endless factors that are contributing to learning. And so it's a matter of deciding which ones are important for the context that we are looking at. And so all of those frameworks that Kari mentioned on the previous slide, they're fantastic for the context that they are looking at. But what we're trying to do is to isolate those factors that are most important in field learning environments. Certainly many other factors are going to come in, but which ones are most important? And so the goal of this framework is really to start looking at which of those factors are the most important. And for some of them, there's a lot of evidence already, and it's really just a matter of plugging that into the framework. And hopefully the framework will also help us identify those factors that we don't have much evidence on. And then finally, using the framework to put those pieces together, right? Because those individual factors don't act in isolation. And so it will provide a framework for research, so coming to better understand field learning, and then eventually, or maybe iteratively, creating some guidelines for what is best practice in the field.
Thanks, Mike. That was great. So like Mike said, there's lots of theories of learning that are kind of options. We wanted to have something to help situate the many complexities that occur with learning. And for this current version of the framework, we are actually using the contextual model of learning. I sent that paper in the email, so y'all could look at it closer if you want. And it is I'll just go to the next slide, actually. Let's see. Like Mike said, in any learning situation, there's many factors that influence learning. And we chose this contextual model of learning as a guide. It is focused on free choice settings, museum settings, zoo settings, thinking about that, which is not, of course, exactly what we're talking about, but it had a lot of the elements of what we're looking at in this situation. And really what the focus on context was a big one. And that, by the way, is why I was super excited to be able to pull in Mike, who I don't think any of y'all have necessarily met before, a colleague I work with here, because his whole focus is thinking about context. And that's really what this is about. Like the students are literally living within the context, and they're learning in context pretty much at all times in these field learning experiences. So this contextual model of learning, I don't want to get too stuck on it, just enough that, like I said, it's a learning model that look at what factors need to be considered for a successful learning experience. And we just let these authors do the heavy lifting, because they narrowed down hundreds of factors already through literature review. And the idea, it's a great model for what we want to do, is they wanted to look at the extent of each of these factors, these learning factors, how they contribute to learning outcomes, in what ways, and for whom. So we can start putting our broadening participation lens on it, and in that way. let's see. And the other thing to be thinking about is with this framework, we eventually want to be, we've talked a lot in our discussions about this idea. There's not just one factor that's important in, you know, impacting these student experiences, but it might be a suite of factors. And can we look at the bundle of factors and how that's impacting learning in these undergraduate field experiences? And that's something that this model had already been thinking about. So there's 3 parts that we'll frame, that we have used to frame our framework around, with this idea that the view of learning for the contextual model of learning is that learning can be conceptualized as a dialogue, a constant dialogue, never ending, between individual and their physical, his or her physical and sociocultural environment. So it's a contextually driven dialogue as a process, interactions between an individual's personal, sociocultural, and physical context over time. That's kind of the main idea behind that. So what I want to do next is I'm going to share an Excel spreadsheet briefly with the framework. And what I'd love for you to do, I'm going to try to go through the whole thing. And if y'all have questions during it, like, whoa, I'm so confused, I have no idea what you're talking about, please feel free to jump out. But other, I'd ask that you just let me go through the whole thing and take any notes along these lines, like what resonates with you, what might be missing, what just doesn't make sense, the language is unclear, those kinds of things.
Kari?
Yes, someone has a
question. I think before you jump into the Excel framework, I think it would help. I think it would help me, and I'm a little familiar already, and maybe some of the others, if you kind of said a little bit more about the slide that you just went from. In other words, like maybe just give an overview of what in general you consider to be those 3 dimensions, because I think if you just start going through row by row in your framework, people will be wondering, well, where is this thing and where is that thing? So
okay, yeah. And I was kind of gonna show a big, well, I mean, I'll go ahead and that sounds good, Alan, thanks for that feedback, because if you have a question that way, someone else probably does too. So in thinking about these 3 contexts, generally the personal context is, you know, what a student brings to the experience. So we're talking about motivation and expectations, prior knowledge, prior experiences, prior interests, those kinds of factors. The sociocultural is really about we're using with fidelity the words from the contextual model of learning, and that's something that we might not stick with in the future. They don't necessarily might not make sense in our context, but in this case we're talking about social mediation, both within group, meaning peer-to-peer, and mediation by others outside the immediate social group, which is interactions between students and faculty. And these are both ones that are designed and intentional through like small groups, and then ones that just happen, and it's just acknowledgement that they always happen in a learning, any kind of learning experience. And then, as you might imagine, this last context, the physical context, is a really big one for, well, all of these are actually really important, I shouldn't say, but just as far as when we think about like what are unique aspects of field learning experiences, the physical is a really big factor in that. And that's elements of that does include orientation, like preparing people ahead of time for the experience, large scale environments, those are the things like weather, kind of the remoteness of the situation, an element of design. So that's all included in the physical. Alan, does that help frame it? Tell me honestly.
Yeah, I think that's great.
Okay, great, thanks. Yeah, and that's great. And that's kind of what I was going to start. So that is fine. So just bear with me while I sent you the framework. I did a lot of work to cut it down, like to be small, because if you're like me and can't see small text, it's really hard. I don't think I'm sharing my screen. Sorry about that. Let me try it again. There. Okay, can you all see great, thanks Alicia, I can see you nodding your head, I appreciate it. So here it is, as I said to Mike and Kelly in an email last night, here it is in all its glory. I've been dreaming about it. And just a couple things, kind of like the broad picture, and Alan, I already did some of it with Alan's question, is down on the left side, and I'm gonna make this small. You don't need to see the print so much. Oh, I'm gonna do the whole framework view. Okay, let me see. On the left, down on the left side, it's organized by the context. So the personal, sociocultural, and physical, like I said. And then on this next column is factors. So the learning factors. And in some cases, I did put in a little more text to explain them. In others, we didn't, because I felt like prior knowledge didn't need much explanation. That's prior knowledge that students bring to the experience. So I did my best to kind of figure out where we needed more information and less. And then along this last big column, how is this factor operationalized for undergraduate field learning experiences? It was our attempt to share some, and I'm going to say that some, not all, of our ideas for how these factors are operationalized in an undergraduate field learning setting. That's where it starts getting more concrete ideas about what does this actually look like in an undergraduate field learning setting. And just a couple other things, and it kind of says this in the goal across the top, but the idea is that this framework is inclusive, hopefully, of a lot of types of undergraduate field learning experiences. So those that are the shorter ones versus the longer ones, the traveling versus field station. With this idea, we can think about field learning experiences in general and actually start investigating some of our questions about, well, what happens if you have a 2-week field experience versus a 10-week? What kind of impact and influence does that have for what student who attends? And the other thing I want to emphasize is all of these are suites. They're big. This is complex. So a lot of these things under this how is the factor operationalized are really even suites. These are suites of factors. So, so that's the big picture. And then I'm just going to go, I want to be quick because I want to have time to hear what you all have to say, to go down through the factors. And I'm going to make this bigger, actually see what we're doing here. Okay, so how is this factor operational? How are these factors operationalized? At least for me, I need to have that concrete, what does this mean? So these personal ones are really about what students bring to the experience. And those need to be a huge factor to consider when we're designing learning experiences and thinking about doing research about their impact and understanding them. So some examples of motivation and expectations are, okay, why might a student participate in a undergraduate field experience, the ecoinformatics program at the Andrews Experimental Forest, for example? That's going to be my example because that's a program that I led several years ago. So they might want to develop or strengthen a career in STEM, to build specific field-based knowledge, or they might want to have an experience. So those are just some examples of how that factor might be operationalized. The next row down is about prior knowledge. So students might come with, they might be STEM majors, they might bring a lot of STEM content knowledge, or I wrote, or not, like thinking about the Transforming Learning program. We have Alicia and Stephanie in the group, and they have developed field courses for students who more come, say, from arts and the humanities, and I think there's some courses about architecture. So those students might bring a very different kind of prior knowledge to the experience. With the REU experiences, students might be bringing research skills, for example. So that's prior knowledge and skills. Prior experiences, and I think this is a really, really important one for our conversation. Students have a wide range in what they're bringing as far as their past experiences with nature, experiences being in remote or physically demanding situations or not having that experience, bringing to the table. And then to draw your attention to this last one, which is one I put down based on my conversations with Nia about, students may not have had experiences being in rural areas basically before. So I put that one, I call that one out based on some conversations I had with her. Prior interest is basically, I think, is self-explanatory. What students are bringing as far as their interests, they might have an interest in spending time in nature, being involved in STEM or field-based science, or and a lot of these are pretty likely just as far as if they signed up for the class. But so this choice and control one, this one I put some more information about because I didn't think it was quite as clear. And this is this idea that the degree which the learner is able to choose according to their own interests and preferences. And this one clearly did come from the museum free choice learning setting, where there's a lot of choice. In a lot of our field-based programs, there might be more, the instructor might actually be making more of the decisions, but student choice is an important aspect to consider. Like, do they get to choose their research project? Do they have any choice in their mentor or small group project, partners, etc.? Those are some examples from the field setting. This next one is sociocultural. And like I said, we have factor considering within group social mediation, and also one outside immediate social group, thinking about the instructor-student relationship. And this is another one where the field setting has some unique examples where students might be sharing social living and education spaces. They might be working in small groups or independently. There's a whole range here. And then also there's a range of a gradient from traditional instructor-student relationships to all the way sharing social living and education spaces between students and experts. And then the last context, and there are several factors in this, is the physical. This one this factor is called advanced organizers, and the idea of this one is anything that provides intellectual navigation for a learning experience, and how that translates into the field experience, or really any learning experience, is thinking about what are the learning goals. Is there something that will provide a bigger picture that will be reinforced throughout, like the broader kind of goals and objective of the course? And I put an example of like connection to a relevant community or regional issue might be kind of an advanced organizer for field courses. This next one is about orientation. And so we put the example for orienting the students by giving them packing lists, meeting faculty, other students beforehand. This is a way that factor could be operationalized. And of course, again, there's a gradient of how much of this is done beforehand and how much is not in a factor in the design. A large-scale environment, that's really the environment as we're thinking, anything from sleeping arrangements, weather, bugs, that kind of situation, degree of access to communication with the outside world. And then this idea of involving all the senses to experience the phenomena of study, which in my example from the Andrews Forest would be an old-growth forest. And then lastly, I'm not going to, these last two elements, one is design, the idea of design, and that's thinking of really at a high level. So what we put in there for examples are like time of year, length of experience. And then I got tired when I was working on this one late last night because I'd somehow missed it in the paper. So this idea of subsequent reinforcing events and experiences, and that's something that actually happens after what we would say our program is, but it does have an impact on learning. So I put those in there too. So I'm going to stop talking, and I'm going to actually let Alan, I'm going to share the not Alan, sorry, not you. Alan, did you know you were talking in our webinar? No, Mike is who I meant. He's going to lead the discussion at this point. Oh, Alan has a question. Okay. And I'm actually, you know what, Mike, I think let's just hear what their thoughts are. And I think, I'm sorry, I'm trying to share my Excel file again. Okay, if we need to look at it. Okay, Alan, can you just holler out your question? People can just start saying them out loud. That would be easier at this point.
Could I actually jump in?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I love Alan's question. But I think what I would say is, in terms of feedback, we would be most interested in big picture ideas. Kari really parsed this down to make it presentable and not get lost in the details. So rather than focusing on nuance and semantics, let's start with bigger picture questions like Alan's. And then if we have time, maybe dive into some of the more fine details, or we can deal with that via email or written feedback.
So let's see. So Alan, I'm just going to read your question. It says, so for the personal context, would programs be characterized by the prior knowledge, motivation, expectation, experiences, or interests targeted by the program? Or are these factors that need to be considered as contributing to variation in outcomes? With this model that we're framing this with, Alan, I would say the latter. I had a conversation with Martin because one of the authors of this paper happens to have an office down the hall from mine. He's a director of our center, and really talked to him about what this model does and what it doesn't. And one of the things that it doesn't, well, it looks at it in that way, that these are factors that need to be considered as contributing to variation in outcomes.
So I guess and that's kind of what I suspected, and I think that makes the kind of purpose of, or one of the purposes of this being kind of, in other words, it makes it less clear how this framework guides the development of advice in terms of best practices, right? So I think that the sociocultural and the actual physical are things that, like somebody like Danielle or me who's designing one of these programs could think about, oh, I have to think about how long and where they're going to be, and if there's bugs and if it's bad weather and all that, right? But although some of that is also probably in this kind of covariate category too, whereas, and I can think about, well, prior research has shown that students who come with no interest in having an experience don't do well with our experience. So I'm going to design a program that tries to select students who have a profile of interest, right? So that's more, again, of a best practices thing, whereas you see, and that's why I wrote up that alternative that where it really focuses on characterizing programs by what they're designed for, or what you're trying to get in your selection criteria, which would, again, that would seem more speaking to the framework guiding a kind of an analysis of the program, which then could be related to outcomes, as opposed to covariates that you have to consider. So anyway, I mean, right.
Can I take a stab at it, Kari?
Yes, please do.
Yeah, so I think it is that. I think that's exactly where we are right now with this, is understanding that these factors are the things that we think have implications for learning, right? Based on existing research, based on other learning frameworks. And, as a designer of a program, it probably behooves you to think about these. The gap right now is that for many of these factors, we don't have a complete we'll never have a complete understanding, but we have a very incomplete understanding of how they impact learning in field environments in particular. And so in some ways, they are very loose design criteria, in the sense that, yes, you should be thinking about this. If you're not thinking about it, it probably is having implications that are unmeasured. And it's a research agenda for let's figure out how these things impact learning. And so, so really where we are right now is, are these the factors that are going to have the biggest implications for learning in the field? And are there others that will also have big implications that we haven't really captured well here, or that this framework doesn't really capture well?
Yeah, I see Sandra Larson's comment was that it's not an either or questions. Some could be intentionally incorporated in the design, but they can also be looked at as covariates to outcomes. Yes, and I think that's our hope. I'm looking at a question from Dave. He says, an important point to consider is what are the learning goals? The learning goals then provide the context for preparing and designing a field activity, the actual experiences. Yes. And I'll tell you this, Dave, that we have had a couple of versions of this framework, and one that we had just a week and a half ago even had, learning goals actually as part of kind of one of our rows. So we're still wrestling with kind of where that should best fit in. This model, or the contextual model of learning, has it as part of kind of this advanced organizer, but it's a really key thing to consider. Any other questions, people, or comments that people want to holler out or put into the chat for everyone to see? And hopefully I'm not missing anything. And is that Teresa? Oh yeah, you have a question, and I'm sorry I missed that one.
That's okay, because it was a different kind of a question.
Yeah.
So I guess I was, since Browning participation was kind of on your minds, I was looking for that, right? Looking for where would you put the race, ethnicity, cultural question, and I thought, oh, okay, you have the social cultural context, and I was fully expecting to see it there, and lo and behold, I didn't see it there, or maybe I missed it because I didn't look carefully. But have you considered that? Is that something that you found? You just haven't found in the literature, or or is it not specific to field experiences or something? But I don't know, and wasn't quite sure whether it would be under social, cultural, or personal either. So I just thought I'd throw that out there.
Yeah, important question, Teresa, and we definitely want to be considering that aspect. I do think it's important, and that's, as Nia said, that's one reason why I wanted to have her involved, because she'd been thinking about some of those aspects a lot. I think some of it is this model that we put out doesn't have like a specific kind of list of the population or the students served by the thinking about it in that clear way, but it fits more like in the personal category with what people bring, their past experiences. And then again, if you're like designing a course using this current model, you'd want to keep that in mind in your thinking through all these learning factors. And so I feel like it's that, like, it's everything, but it's not, it's really important, but it's not called out specifically in this framework. But Mike, what am I missing with that explanation?
Yeah, no, I think I would actually love to hear where Teresa would put it.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I could see two very different versions of it. I think the quick version is, it lives in personal because it's these students' personal backgrounds. But I agree that it really depends on how you approach it. Are you designing around a socio-cultural frame where you're recognizing that that there are multiple cultures represented and multiple ways of knowing and ways of doing, or are you approaching it from, this is science and you have to acculturate? And I hope that is not the case, but I'd be interested to hear what Teresa would say as to where it would best fit within this framework.
Well, thank you for that opportunity. I'm not sure if I can quite answer that question, and I would love to hear from others in the group as well. I mean, I just think that that's, at least from my experience, somehow voicing that or allowing that aspect to be named and to be given voice in a field experience helps the student to feel that they belong, right, in a field like this, or in an experience like this, that, you know, this is not, you know, that we acknowledge that there might be, people might be either struggling with that, or you know, may want to bring something from their own experience, from that cultural experience background, into the learning. So, and if it's not explicitly called out, it is not clear that that would, you know, sort of automatically translate, or, you know, or that it would be addressed, I guess. So I would love to hear from others. I don't know yet right now what, you know, where it would go at this point. Yeah.
So I have a concrete suggestion, and that would be to add, maybe to stay at the big level, to add a row that's a factor in the personal, that's something about identity.
Ooh.
and kind of current identity, or pride, I don't know, maybe just identity or identities. And then across that row could go sociocultural identity, kind of vocational, you know, maybe a couple of categories of identity that we know are important. I think that there's a lot of, you know, work on identity as an overlapping, maybe distinct from bundles of these other ones in personal. So I could see you could justify leaving it out, but I think that would be a way. And I don't think you'd necessarily want to say sociocultural identity as the factor. I think it would be identity, but then prominent, like the first one could be sociocultural identity, and then other identities could be acknowledged there. And then I think that the social could add kind of attention to kind of the diverse backgrounds of people in both, in each of the rows there. That could be one of the elements, right? Whatever you call these things that are in the cells. To the right.
Just really, they're almost like examples, kind of, because it's so hard to,
But some of those are really, really, really important.
Mm-hmm.
Like in the whole physical thing, kind of the basic features of the program are really captured in those cells, right? So they're not trivial, just examples. They're kind of major elements or dimensions, or whatever term you use. So I think that that's the two places that I would suggest.
Kari, I have a question.
Teresa's.
Yes.
So, yeah, in Ian's group, when we were thinking about the framework initially, we sort of split things up into characteristics of the participants, attributes of the program, and then outcomes of the program. And so how does what that group started work into what the framework has now? Because I'm missing some of those components in this Excel sheet.
Nia, do you have any off the top of your head that you see that are missing? Not to put you on the spot. And I have all of that. I've been looking at it a lot. So can go back and look to identify some of those myself.
I was pulling up one of Ian's old emails, so give me a second and I can maybe find something.
Yep. Yeah, not to put you on the spot, but that's why we're doing this. And Ian had come to me after that, and because I was like, what do you think's next? What does that group need help with? And he talked about tying it to literature. And we have taken it quite a spin since that original group. Although I still refer back. And the other thing I'll also say is we have like bigger versions of this framework that we couldn't share. They were just too big. So some of them might be living in some stuff that I haven't shown here. But while you're looking, Nia, I am just going to call out that, like, while Alan was bringing up his idea of identity, Sandra sent a chat note about the same idea. So thank you for that. And then I'm going to,
Ari, just to respond to Nia, one of the things she mentioned was there's no outcomes in this.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Now, do you want to address that?
Yes. I mean, and now I'm all like, Well, that was something that we did have at one time, right, Mike? We actually had the learning outcomes as an important factor, and I think Dave brought it up too earlier in the chat. And we've been on the fence about where they fit into this, whether they, and again, I feel like we're exploring using this model to fidelity, and we would maybe have to kind of add them in again. But
so as part of that, like to Teresa's point,
mm-hmm.
an outcome could be expanding participation. You also have outcomes as, you know, getting students onto a STEM trajectory, or having the participants as an outcome develop new ways of participating within their own communities. So I think that's probably the biggest part that I see doesn't reflect this list of things in this previous email.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think that's where you could add some of that sort of the goals of expanding representation as an outcome.
Mm-hmm.
I do agree that they are personal. The students who come to the programs, that's a personal attribute of theirs, but it's also potentially an outcome of expanding representation.
Yeah. And one way to think about this, I think, is that all of these factors need to be considered in really any of those outcomes. Some maybe being more important than others. So it's kind of how to bring that back in. Thanks, Nia. So we're at close to time. I want to be respectful of everyone's time, and well, at least to wrap us up for the moment, thanks for all your comments. And for any of you who have time, or like me, need to like look at something and reflect on it, and you're willing to send us any more comments, just put comments in that Excel and, you know, send them on to me. We're going to be saving all of this. So we still love to hear further feedback. If any of you have time to give them or follow up with questions, please do that. That's really it, I guess. Just mentioning again that we have we'll have our next webinar on May 8th. And a bunch of us will, if anyone's at the Ecological Society of America meeting, we'll be doing an Inspire session on some of this topic. A bunch of the people in this Zoom room will be involved in that, so let us know. Okay, and I'm seeing Teresa's comment. I like Alan's suggestion on how to incorporate identity. Mike, what are we missing here in the last couple minutes? Any last comments from people? Any last thoughts? Okay, so Alan, that's good. What's the next step for UFERN and the framework that folks can contribute to? So I actually have a slide about that, so let me bring that up. Well, stop share. Yes, Danielle, I will re-email I'll send the Excel spreadsheet out. I'm a processor as well. I saw that question. Okay, I'm not going to bother with the slide. That will take too long. So as far as next steps, I mean, we want to get this framework to a point where we're going to present it at the Ecological Society of America meeting in August. So we're going to process in our smaller group, which is like a nice team who can really dig in together, your comments. And if y'all are interested, we'd love to send out another version in, probably in the next few weeks to get any last comments and thoughts about it. So that's one thing. Another next step for UFERN is, like I said, we'll be at the Ecological Society of America meeting in August for those of you who are there. And then we'll be having our next network meeting will be in October, hopefully in Colorado. And we're going to be scheduling that. We had to put off what was going to be our spring network meeting through October. So we will definitely be letting all of you on this call know about that, and hope you can join us for that network meeting. So that's our thinking. It's 11 o'clock here, so thanks to all of you. And as I said, please share any further questions, thoughts that you have, and we'll follow up with a future draft